consider donating to my Patreon for early access to my videos and other fun perks. Remember when I did a review of Metarunner? Well, I found another fairly ambitious animated series released by a YouTuber of a similar size. Now, the reason this video took so long is because I didn't watch Epithet Erased until March, and I didn't do a review then because it didn't seem like it would be relevant. Plus, I think I was busy with the Danganronpa video. However, a part of me still wanted to review it, and now that I've got a gap in my video schedule, I figured, why not? The premise of Epithet Erased is pretty easy to understand. About 1 in 5 people has a superpower called an epithet. There's a necklace called the Arsene Amulet that lets you steal someone else's epithet, and the story revolves around a bunch of people chasing after this amulet for various reasons. That's a pretty fun idea. A bunch of people with superpowers chasing after a MacGuffin just sounds like an exciting time, and it is. Before we get into anything else, I should talk about the animation, because you're all probably going to be distracted until I address it. As you can clearly see, it's not fully animated, at least not in the traditional way. Each character has a bunch of static poses and facial expressions they switch between, kinda like a visual novel. The most movement we get out of them is the character rotating or shaking around. Now, I'm sure a lot of you are probably gonna compare this to Metarunner, and frankly, that isn't really a fair comparison. Aside from SMG4 having nearly double the subscriber count of Jello Apocalypse, there's also the matter of funding. Metarunner was backed by Crunchyroll, Epic Games, AMD, and the friggin' Australian government. This show had verve. So of course they didn't have time to make 7 half-hour traditionally animated episodes and get them out in a timely manner. Luckily, Epithet Erased makes the most of this limitation. The show may not be fully animated, but it's far from motionless. The characters are moving around constantly, and the movement, combined with the sound effects and expressive designs, gives the characters a really lively feel. The animation also works in tandem with the humor. Both the movements and one-liners are really fast-paced, so they work to enhance each other. Also, some of the jokes are just funnier because of this style. Take this one, for instance.
She points her gun at him.
I can reload too, you know.
I spit in his mouth.
Did that seriously just happen?
That joke would just be disgusting in a normal animated program, but here, due to how absurd the movements are, it's really funny. The animation also works pretty well with the action sequences. That might sound surprising, but like I said, this show does the best it can with what it has. You always have a clear view of the epithets and an understanding of how they work. They manage to make things look pretty cinematic in a lot of cases, and when they don't, things are at least interesting. Whenever a lot of characters are moving around, they switch to a simplified top-down perspective so you can see where everyone is. Also, you see numbers pop up when characters get hit, giving a sort of RPG feel, which makes sense because I think this series was based off a tabletop RPG. At the end of the day, the most important part of an action sequence is being able to see what's going on, and this show does a great job of that. I'd take this over an action movie that abuses shaky cam and changes shots every 5 frames any day of the week. Also, the characters narrate their own actions from time to time. It's pretty charming, and I guarantee it would be a lot less funny if they just had a regular narrator instead of having each voice actor narrate their character's actions. It just adds an extra layer of charm. As for other technical stuff, the artwork is great. All the character designs are really expressive, unique, and just generally appealing. The backgrounds are good too. Not particularly special, but they're pretty colorful and do their job just fine. Music's also good. The background music does a great job of setting the mood, and the credit themes and intro song are fantastic. Seriously, this show's intro is better than most cartoon intros that air on actual TV. The voice acting is also really good, but I think I'll go more into that in the character section. For now, let's go into the story more generally. The first thing I should note is something I didn't realize going in. You would expect a show like this to have one continuous storyline throughout the season, but it's actually split into 2 arcs, both of which are really different. Like, not only is the villain and location different in both arcs, but so are the characters featured. Giovanni is the only character who has much of a presence in both of them. Now, this isn't necessarily a bad thing, just something you'd want to know going in. If I had to pick, I'd say the museum arc is the better of the two, but they're both pretty good. The story's also well paced. All the events feel like they're given enough time without feeling dragged out. Also, despite how goofy the show is, they managed to create some tense moments. Each episode ends on a pretty good cliffhanger. One of the story's biggest highlights is the epithets, usually starting with a simple base concept and coming up with ideas from there. For instance, one of the characters has soup as a power, and they're able to do a surprising amount with it. Like I said earlier, the fight scenes are a lot of fun, and a large part of that is seeing just how creative these powers can be. Of course, the most notable thing to talk about with this series is the humor. After all, despite all the action and suspense, this is predominantly a comedy. So, how's the humor? I love it, but I'll admit it's not for everyone, and if it's not for you, you're gonna hate this show. The best way to sum up the show's humor is that it's quick, surreal one-liners.
Well, time to turn myself in. 9, 1, 1.
Hello, this is the cops.
Hi, I'd like to go to jail.
This is one of the first lines in the show, and it perfectly sums up its sense of humor. While the show does know when to tone things down for a serious moment, it's mostly filled to the brim with these kinds of jokes. It thrives in a goofy, chaotic, and surreal atmosphere, and it's all helped along by its cast of memorable characters. Speaking of characters, the characters in Epithet Erased have so much personality, I couldn't not dedicate a section to them. Just like with Runner, I'm going to go through each one individually, and in the interest of time, I'm only going over the ones featured in the intro. To start with, there's the main character in the museum arc, Molly. Molly is freaking adorable. She's also surprisingly mature for her age, likely because her tragic backstory forced her to grow up fast. A lot of the humor surrounding her is about how hilariously miserable her home life is. That and the fact she's a massive pushover, to the point where she's willing to let her epithet get stolen just because Mira seemed to really want it. However, she learns to stand up for herself as the arc goes on, and it's so satisfying to watch. Next is Giovanni Potage. He's an over-the-top supervillain who loves to think of himself as a criminal mastermind, but he's really just a nice guy. Now, that's a pretty unique idea, a decade and a half ago. Look, I don't dislike the trope or anything, I'm just saying it's been done, and Giovanni needed to set himself apart from the rest if I was going to enjoy his character. And in the first episode, he doesn't really do that. It doesn't feel like there's much to set him apart from someone like Megamind or Papyrus. But that's just the first episode. In the second episode, like almost immediately, Giovanni really grew on me. The amount of care he has for his underlings is nice, the fact he was suckered into a pyramid scheme is pretty hilarious, and his friendship with Molly is nothing short of wholesome.
I can't have people stepping all over my minions when I'm not around. You gotta learn to stand up for yourself. Got it?
No! How's that?
Ha, nice try. I'm your boss, so you have to listen to me. Not bad, though. We'll work on it.
He just has this unique flair to him that's really charming and funny. Also, it's nice to hear someone use the word minion correctly for once. The best way to sum up Dr. Sylvester Ashling is that he's Dib from Invader Zim if he managed to expose Zim within a week of meeting him. At least, that's the vibe I got. He's got an interesting duality to him. On one hand, he's whiny, likely because he's only 15, but on the other hand, this dude is legitimately badass. Both because he's insanely smart for his age, and because he has one of the coolest epithets in the show. Seriously, it's like 4 powers rolled into one. Next up is the only character I have mixed feelings on, Indus Tarbella. Clever pun aside, this guy is your typical dumb, good-natured brute. He's the kind of character who, if this were airing on a TV network, he'd probably be voiced by Patrick Warburton. My thoughts on this guy are similar to my thoughts on Gary in Season 1 of Final Space. He can be legitimately funny and endearing, but can also be a bit much and seriously grate on my nerves. If he comes back in Season 2, I hope they do the same thing Final Space did with Gary and tone him down a bit to make him more enjoyable. Seriously, after the first episode, I feel like Mira every time I hear him say barrier. Speaking of Mira, she's the main villain in the museum arc and does a pretty good job at it. She has this irritated, passive-aggressive demeanor that sometimes shifts into condescending smugness or a full-blown freakout, and it's pretty funny to watch. Luckily, she can also be pretty chilling whenever she needs to be. Her whole goal is to steal Molly's epithet, and her motive for doing so is sympathetic, cleverly built up, and ties in interestingly with the show's premise. I dare not spoil it here. The two main characters of the Red One Run arc are total opposites and complement each other beautifully. The first one is Officer Percival King. Aside from having a strong sense of justice, the most notable part about Percy is that she has some of the craziest lines in the show, and unlike most of the other characters who have really over-the-top voices, Percy says these insane lines like they're the most normal things in the world.
The crayons of debauchery, then. What a fiendish weapon to conceal beneath the facade of childlike innocence.
Ramsey, on the other hand, is the exact opposite. He's a dude who voluntarily hangs out in jail, has a rat face, golden eye, and Hawaiian shirt, and despite all that, he's probably the most down-to-earth character in the whole series. So much of his screen time is him being the one sane person in a town full of lunatics, and it's hilarious.
How are you doing that?
Oh, have you never before supped upon pinted cone? It's quite simple. You just have to know the proper way to milk the cone.
Never say those words ever again.
Plus, unlike Percy, he's really laid back, which makes for a fun buddy cop dynamic. Finally, we have Zora. The funny thing about Zora is that she probably has less than 5 minutes of screen time prior to the final episode, but she makes one hell of an impression when she does show up. The most notable thing about Zora is that she's overpowered. She's the kind of person who could kick your ass without an epithet, but she does have one, and it's easily the strongest shown so far. As a result, it feels like a real spectacle when she arrives, and she knows it.
Have you ever once hunted someone with a bounty higher than your own?
Oh, I would, but I've been at the top of the list for so long. That's how you know I'm good.
She's insanely confident in her abilities, to the point where she's willing to handicap herself just to give her opponents a fair shot. Even her motive ties into this 100% earned sense of superiority, which again, I don't want to spoil. So, final thoughts on Epithet Erased. Simply put, I really liked it. Yeah, there were a few hiccups here and there, and the show does have its share of limitations, but it works through them to create something funny, endearing, and all-around engaging. I am Defoffalizer, and I really hope Epithet Erased gets a second season. Oh, and if you're wondering, I actually liked this more than Meta Runner, as crazy as that sounds.